Good day, everyone. My name is David Williams, Executive Director of the International Association for Energy Economics. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Delivering a Modern Digitalized Energy Seminar. We're grateful to our moderator, Dr. Richard Green, and our distinguished panelists for today's timely discussion. First, a little bit about the International Association for Energy Economics. We are the largest association specializing in the field of energy economics and provide a forum for the exchange of ideas, experience, and issues among professionals interested in the field. The organization produces 2 professional journals, a newsletter, and holds conferences and virtual presentations, along with a host of other products and services you can find on our website at www.iaee.org. If you're not a member of the association, we welcome you to join. A few housekeeping matters in regard to today's webinar before I hand things over to our moderator. First, this webinar is being recorded for those that cannot participate in today's live event. If you have any questions for our panelists, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window and type your question. We've allocated sufficient time at the end of this webinar to address them. And now I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Dr. Richard Green, Professor, Imperial College Business School. Richard, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, David. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, possibly even good middle of the night. It's wonderful to see the number of people who are joining going up by the moment. And I'm delighted to be hosting today's meeting on behalf of the International Association for Energy Economics and the British Institute of Energy Economics. And it's looking at the future of digital energy, and in particular, Dr. Aidan Rhodes from the Energy Futures Lab at Imperial College London is presenting his recent report on the future of digital energy. And then we've got 2 well-qualified commentators. Firstly, Laura Sands, CBE, who is chair of the recent Energy Data Taskforce that was set up by the UK government, and then Dr. Jeff Hardy of the Grantham Insitute, Climate and the Environment at Imperial College London. And so without any further ado, except to say, if you missed the first, because people are still joining, if you missed Dave Williams's invitation, if you have questions, use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And now I will hand things over to Aidan to tell us about his report.
Hi, my name's Aidan Rhodes. I'm a research fellow at Imperial College Energy Futures Lab. I will just get my presentation up. So this is part of a series of briefing papers that we have published over the past, over the past couple of years, aimed at policymakers and energy stakeholders, both in the UK and around the world, on various interesting matters of energy technologies and policy. So we have several briefing papers. If you search for Energy Futures Lab Imperial on Google, you'll find links to download all of these. But this is the 5th paper which we've written on digitalisation of energy. And I guess the first question is, why are we interested in digitalisation of energy? It's an important topic, it's incredibly timely, and there's an awful lot of interest in the energy sector on digitalisation, for digitalisation solutions at the moment, due to various pressures both within and without the sector. There's interesting questions for energy stakeholders. Digitalisation applications can help to modernise and decarbonise the energy system, but they can also lead to unintended consequences. They could lead unintentionally to destabilising the energy system, for example. So we're interested in publishing a report aiming at near-term trends for the next 5 or so years, and aiming it more at energy stakeholders which aren't so proficient in the digitalisation world. So there's a fair amount of technologies, buzzwords such as AI, machine learning, big data, Internet of Things, blockchain, which they're buzzwords, but they're not necessarily well understood by the average energy stakeholder. So this report is just aimed to provide a bit of background, a bit of clarity on what these technologies can do, and crucially, what they can't do. So this is just going to be a short overview presentation of the report. I won't have time to go through everything in the report, but as I said, you can download it from the website. There'll be a link at the end of this paper, at the end of this presentation, and one which will be circulated to participants. So I guess digitalization is a complicated subject. It's a very broad area, and it's difficult necessarily to segment into sections. So this has been my attempt to do that. Other people may have different ideas of where the dividing line should be, but as far as building blocks, I focus on 4 main building blocks. This is big data, collecting large volumes of data, machine learning and AI, that's using that data to run interesting classification and clarification procedures. The Internet of Things, so physical technologies which connect directly to the digital realm, and distributed ledgers. This is commonly known as blockchain. We'll get onto that a bit later on. Enabling technologies for these building blocks are 5G and mesh networks, so very fast, very detailed mobile networks, as well as cloud computing, so distributed computing and its newer counterparts, fog computing and edge computing, which is computing done closer to the distributed devices than in the centralized cloud server. Some applications of digitalization. This is just a quick table just to show some but not all various ideas of how these 4 building blocks interact with the energy supply chain, which you're familiar with today. So we see how they work basically across the how these technologies work across the supply chain from the generation side through the networks all the way to the consumers. There's more detail on some of these technologies in the report. This is just to show that these technologies aren't just focused on one area of the energy system, but really across the entire supply chain. So just some quick overviews of the sections then. So this is data and AI. Big data. Big data basically refers to data which is too big to be, volumes of data which are too large to be processed using traditional methods such as Excel or even Microsoft Access. So we're talking about gigabytes, even terabytes, or even petabytes of data. So very vast quantities of data. And there's 5 V's in big data. This is basically the 5 classifications of the data set. This is volume, velocity, variety, veracity, how trustworthy the data is, and what we can actually rely on this data, and value. So this is the value of the data set, whether it's to you financially, or whether it's to provide research results, or whether it's to someone else in the chain. One interesting thing in the energy sector is that the value of data sets is often not directly used by the companies that produce them. For example, the value of data sets that DNOs and transmission companies may produce, for example, may well be more valuable to either generation companies looking to site new generation, or consumer-facing companies looking to optimize market factors and costs than they are to the actual companies. So there are some interesting questions onto how to for maximum economic benefit, how to actually use and open up this data from its owners. With data, once you've got your large quantities of data, you can now use extremely advanced analytical techniques known as machine learning in order to really find out new, novel, and interesting interpretations which you may not be able to find in conventional measures. So these are fueled by large data sets and big processes. So this is machine learning has just got better over the last decade, simply because you've had the data and the processes in order to do it successfully. And machine learning is a classification technology, basically. So you can see on the right side of the screen, this is a neural network, which is the most commonly used form of machine learning nowadays. There are others. And in this, you basically put in a training data set on one side, and you train the machine, the neural network, via a series of data training sets in which you specify the outputs that you want to get. The training process then creates a load of hidden layers, as you can see there, where each point processes the data in a certain way. This has gone into in more detail in the report, but basically the network is refined via thousands of iterations in order to provide an output which is similar to what we might want. For example, if we were putting in inputs pictures of cats on one side, and we say we want this to be classified as a cat on the other side, then the network is trained when it can just see a picture of a cat and say with a high degree of probability this is a cat. So this is one of the most rapidly evolving subsets of machine learning. It's very successful when you can see large data sets and clear outcomes that you want to see from those data sets. One of the most interesting and important parts of it, though, is that a lot of the time these hidden layers are not easily explainable. The neural network is built up without human intervention, and it's often difficult to understand exactly why a particular neural net has produced a particular outcome, even though it seems to be producing it at a high degree of success. So that is important, and we'll come back to that a bit later. Across the machine learning is a subset of AI. This is a graph from a report in 2016, basically attempting to classify AI technologies into a periodic table. As you can see, there's many different types of technologies, but I think the key points of understanding how artificial intelligence works is there's three major sections of an artificial intelligence. There's one which assesses data coming in. This is the machine learning process, similar to it we saw earlier. Infer conclusions from that data and then respond. So this could be a physical response in the real world, a digital response, but some sort of response coming out of it. And there, across the energy sector, there are several applications in which AI makes a lot of sense to use. It's been very successful. Four of these are modeling and optimization. You can use it extremely successfully in modeling energy systems, including demand, forecasting, and prediction. And it's extremely useful, as Google has found out, along with other companies such as our National Grid in the UK, at finding out weather and wind speed forecasting with a greater success than conventional methods, which enables you to optimize your energy system with large amounts of wind turbines with a greater deal of success. The markets and investment, you can have autonomous agents for market interactions and investment models. Maintenance and security, AIs can be used to successfully predict and optimize maintenance schedules and efforts, which are important when we consider these large, high-value assets, especially things such as offshore wind turbines, which are difficult and expensive to maintain. And customer-facing services, and this is the services which most of us will be most familiar with artificial intelligence, smart home energy management, things such as Siri and Alexa, integration of microgeneration and storage, and further on, community-level virtual power plants, bundling and billing of energy services between suppliers. So there's several applications you can use for AI. There are also a few downsides. One of these downsides I explained a bit earlier was explainable AI. Most AI is not really explainable because it's built on these black box systems where inputs come in and outputs go out, but we're not entirely sure how they work in the meanwhile. But if we're expecting energy systems to be used, if we're expecting these technologies to be used for critical energy applications, accountability is going to be needed. And we need to understand and explain, how these systems are making decisions and why they're making decisions. However, there is a trade-off in capability and security potentially in implementing explainable transparent systems. It's not a one-way street. So this is a potential roadblock for AI. And there's a couple of other roadblocks, one around potential growth processing power, which is explained in the report in more detail. Going on to the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things basically refers to any device, not necessarily a computer or mobile phone, but a more unsophisticated device. It could be your smart speaker like your Alexa, it could be your fridge, your television. It could be an industrial machine in an industrial plant. These amount of internet connected devices are growing exponentially, forecast to be over 76 billion by 2025. And new technologies are really required in order to make the most of these. We're seeing some of these rolled out already. So we're seeing the slow but steady rollout of 5G, which allows not just faster speeds and lower latencies, but also a larger amount of devices connected in a square kilometre by about a factor of 10 to 4G, which is going to be important for Internet of Things devices. Edge computing, as I said, this reduces the latency required to make decisions and assess information by locating smaller data centers closer to demand rather than For example, me in the UK sending off a request to Google in the US and back in order for it to be identified. And this Internet of Things works best, as I said, when you need to have low latency and high parallelization. So lots of devices working together in small communities with a mixture of local and cloud processing. There are three challenges here: making sure this is secure, ensuring there's enough connectivity, and ensuring integration between both smart devices and legacy non-smart devices. If you consider, for example, an industrial plant, some devices may be Internet of Things connected, some may not be, because the plant owner may not be able to upgrade all devices at the same time. How do you integrate your new generation of devices with your old generation while still keeping some of these technologies features? And this is just a small table showing some of the present near-term and medium-term applications of Internet of Things. As we move on from 5 years to 15 years in the future, we'll see far more autonomous vehicles, far more autonomous city and industrial processes. This, of course, brings up the cybersecurity problem. The electricity networks have been relatively resilient in the past. However, with the advent of smart grid technology and digital control systems, the risk of attack becomes a lot greater. And it's been estimated the cost of a major cyber attack on London, for example, could be up to 111 million a day in lost economic output. We've already seen this happen in the Ukraine, and in the US. There's been some successful, some unsuccessful small-scale intrusion since 2011. So cybersecurity really needs to be at the base of everything we decide in the energy system when it comes to digital technologies. These technologies need to be secure and robust, both for malicious and non-malicious interventions. Just a little bit here on blockchain. This is a new and relatively controversial technology. It's known in the academic sphere as distributed ledger technology. It's basically each component on the blockchain network keeps a verified copy of their particular ledger. This is all encrypted, and the network itself gathers these transactions into blocks, which are then verified by everyone using a particular encryption or verification process, and then added to the end of the ledger. So that's just a very simple explanation of how the technology works. There are several potential energy applications of blockchain. The graph on the left shows an ambitious, probably far-term use of the transformation of the market structure in the electricity markets to basically remove energy suppliers and people and the market operator in the middle, and allowing consumers and generators to supply energy directly using blockchain. Obviously, that's an ambitious and far out structure, but that's some of the potential applications. In the nearer term, blockchain can be used for example, green certificates and carbon trading. It can allow verified origin certificates of generation. It can be used for grid management, and it can be used for decentralized billing and security. However, there are several challenges when it comes to blockchain, and one of the reasons why the technology can be seen a bit overhyped. A lot of current implementations, such as Bitcoin and Ethereum, have seen slow transaction speeds, a lot slower than a more centralized system, well, it's extremely high energy usage caused by the verification process. So some of these, the energy usage could be reduced, the transaction speeds could be improved, but this will take some time in order to make a robust system. And there's also, especially as the systems become more decentralized away from a central authority, questions around regulation, standardization, and oversight. And not just that, but there's also issues around consumer acceptance. The graph below is from a paper which came out just this year in the UK, showing consumer understanding of these technologies. And as soon as you say blockchain, most of them don't know what it is. And as soon as you say it powers Bitcoin, most of them hate the idea, and they think it's less likely they would use energy applications based on this technology. So there's significant amount of consumer acceptance because of the well-publicized stories around fraud and theft of Bitcoins we've seen over the last few years, for people to trust it with their either identity or their funds. So these are issues. So just a quick summing up as we reach the end. I feel that the digitalization of the energy system can be seen either as sort of two paradigms. You can see a sort of component-orientated approach to digitalization. So you can sort of view this process of implementing technologies as an incremental process. So you're replacing a transformer with a internet connected transformer, you're replacing a meter with a smart meter, but you're still maintaining the structure and basic capabilities of the system and the actors within it to be the same. Or you can view these technologies as systemic innovations, where we're basically seeing a massive connectivity increase, we're seeing increasing quality of communications, which enables the grid to almost be like a foundation network, like a 4G network, for example, which enables radical new uses of technologies which we might not be able to understand at this minute. And these two paradigms, I think anyone who interested in this area needs to kind of think which paradigm we should be going down, because regulatory issues change, policymakers need to make decisions, and the industry needs to make decisions based on where they see the future of the grid being. So there's a few key points to sum up. Decarbonisation, digitalisation are intrinsically linked. So if you see a pathway to decarbonising the energy system with a lot of decentralised solar panels on people's roofs, battery storage in people's homes, that's a very different implementation of digital technology to a more centralised system with more centralised, renewable and low carbon generation. It's important to understand what digital tech can do and what it can't do. For example, machine learning is extremely good at classifying images. It's very bad at solving sociological problems, just to make a very broad straw man. These technologies are extremely good at certain areas and extremely bad at certain other areas, and you need to understand what these areas are and how they can help you. Regulatory measures, I think, should be open and flexible as we can in order to ensure that we can try all these concepts successfully. And digitalisation technologies rely on consumer consent and acceptance. You need to take the consumers with us on any journeys. Demonstration pilots interact with real consumers where possible essential. And just to sum up as a question, what are the major decision points which will set us on a particular digitalisation path? When do we need to take them, and who needs to take these decisions? So just finally, 5 areas to understand. Stakeholders need to understand the technologies and how they work. They need to understand the consumers and how they react to these technologies. They need to understand data, how to collect it, and when to share it and when not to share it, and how to ensure that you've got trust with your consumers, that you're keeping their data private and secure. Automation, we need to understand which areas we can automate with AI, robotics, and other automation technologies, and which areas we still need to have humans using and overseeing. I need to understand cybersecurity, how to keep these technologies secure, especially because some of these components have a relatively long life, 20 to 30 years. How do we keep these secure throughout the period of our lives? So thank you for listening. You can download it from this URL here, which will be circulated after the presentation and session. And thank you. I look forward to answering your questions.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Aidan. I now see that a couple of people have put questions on the Q&A bar, which is the way to ask questions. We will move on to questions later, but before that, I'm very pleased to introduce Laura Sands, who's going to be our first respondent in the light of the Energy Data Taskforce report that she chaired. So thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Richard, and it's absolutely great to be part of this international webinar, and very, very pleased to follow on from Aidan. My name is Laura Sands, and I was chairing the Energy System Data Taskforce that was commissioned by the UK government, the UK regulator, and Innovate UK, which is the UK sort of innovation arm of government. And in many ways, I pay great tribute to Aidan and Jeff, who's going to be talking after me, because we, in some ways, stimulated a little bit of this task force through the reports that we did with Imperial College on stating in many ways that data was one of the very, very undervalued and new, in many ways, innovations that sat at the heart of the decarbonisation agenda. I would very much look when Aidan had his two paradigms. One was the paradigm of it being just a sort of an enabling technology, or whether it was transformative. And we put to government, and our recommendations have been accepted by government and the regulator, that this and digitalisation of the energy system was transformative. So here we have our regulator, or possibly our government, sitting in the middle here, looking at the new energy system. And this is super complex. And I think there was an interesting question in the box about, is this just about electricity? No, it's about the overall system and how the system is actually interacting with lots of other systems that we're not used to interacting with, whether it be mobility, the heat sector coming together with the electricity sector, but also when it comes to hydrogen. And if you look at the future of the consumer side is going to be very much around aggregators, around bundled products, around, in many ways, sort of blurred lines between energy and consumer products. But in addition to that, it still needs to be managed, and particularly when we're looking at the electricity sector, we still need to ensure stability and security. And so if I was sitting here in the middle, as we have our great regulator Ofgem, I am trying to balance all these different dimensions and these interactions. And we don't believe that this is possible without a much more deeply ingrained digitalization of the system. And currently, today, one could say, and I do, sometimes not to the great welcome of the energy sector, we are sort of playing blind man's bluff, because with huge amount of distributed energy that we have growing right across the country and right across the world, do we know where it is? Do we know how it's working? Do we know how it's interacting? And do we know where the risks lie? And certainly in the UK, but I think beyond internationally, we have got quite an issue around saying that we know where everything is and how it's interacting, but sometimes actually playing the bluff game. So I was commissioned by the government with the Energy Systems Catapult to deliver a modern digitalised energy system strategy. And so we really put into two key areas that the energy system, and we love everybody totally in the energy sector, but when it comes to data, we are pretty poor. We're pretty poor in terms of quality of the data. We're pretty poor in terms of skills, really, and I think Aidan's paper is unbelievably important, actually for management, to understand where the skills gaps lie. And we've got a lot of data gaps in understanding how the system works and what the interactions will be in this new world. The other dimension is there is no point in filling these gaps if we're not maximizing the value. And we were quite surprised, but we pushed very hard. We brought together the UK industry and said, we think that energy system data, and it's a little bit different from consumer data, should be presumed open. And that does not mean that all data would be open, but it means that you, as a data manager, as a data owner, let's say you run a network or you are running a wind farm, that your data should start off with being presumed open, and you can triage it back to a more closed environment, but that as much as possible should be accessible to other parts of the system so that we can manage and we can optimize the overall system operation. And so we developed two very clear propositions that, as I say, government has absolutely adopted. The first is digitalisation right across the regulated sector. So in the new regulatory measures that have been put forward by our regulator, digitalisation is one of the central planks. It requires more data from the regulated sector. It looks for the sector to continually improve, and it wants embedded digitalisation strategies. These are going to be very, very important, particularly when we look at that skills gap. On the presumed open, we absolutely drove for, there's no point in us opening this data and it being totally incomprehensible. And as we have today, there is not great data management within the sector. And so therefore, we need to put some standards and some shape around it. And all data needs to be discoverable, searchable, and understandable. And one thing we were surprised about when we were talking about this radical view of presumed open was the security aspect. And I don't know whether anybody in this webinar is from Estonia, but I always put my hands up to Estonia as being actually at the forefront of being able to ensure that data is exceptionally accessible, but at the other sense, actually ensuring that it is secure. And we worked with our security teams in the UK at the heart of government to ensure that the way we looked at presumed open met those needs. So what has come out of this report are 3 key building blocks as well. And that is the data catalogue, which actually registers the metadata for all the data sets that the energy sector has. That sounds like a very big deal, but it's actually much, much more straightforward. An asset registration strategy and a digital systems map. Now, the data catalogue that will be centrally developed by our Office of National Statistics will be like an inventory. It'll be like a shop window of all data in the energy sector. And that will ensure that people can access it, understand what exists, and question whether it is as open as it should be. The asset registration strategy, and I'm sure a lot of you around the world have the same problem, we have 41 different platforms and places by which you can register an asset. And this actually is going to make understanding and managing an integrated system impossible. And so we're looking to create a strategy, and that's being developed at the moment, to, in many ways, rationalize that registration process so that as you put on new assets onto the system, you can build the picture of the digital systems map. And the digital systems map really comes from the experience of Australia. Australia, having had a bit of a crisis in its energy system about 4 or 5 years ago, decided that it needed to open up its data and created a visible and operational capability map of the energy system. And we're working very much with their expertise to develop the UK-wide one, which will be in beta in the next 4 to 5 months. But to be frank, and this comes back down to what Aidan was saying, is that actually it is not energy. It is all infrastructure. It is a systems-wide, beyond energy, that requires a collaboration. If we look at telecoms and energy, and particularly through our great experience of our lockdowns, are actually becoming one inextricable infrastructure system. They are absolutely interrelated. We've got waste and resources that can feed into the energy system. The water sector is their second largest bill is energy, and in many ways their energy expertise is very much sitting on the side. And then, of course, transport, when it comes to EVs, when it comes to potentially hydrogen, HGVs, all of this will start to conflate. And so fundamentally, what is important is that we set this framework that actually shapes how we can start sharing energy within the energy sector and beyond, and ensure that we're creating both modern, collaborative, and, to be frank, robust infrastructure systems. And so I very much look forward to questions afterwards. But just to say that this is one of my very few experiences where government, the regulator, and the industry itself have come together and actually agreed a set of proposals and ensured that they have been implemented. So a great tribute to collaboration in an unusual group of people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. So our second discussant is Dr. Jeff Hardy from Imperial College London. And so over to you, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Richard. And always it's very good to follow Aidan and Laura because they do 90% of the job for you. So I can just ride in at the end and say a couple of interesting things, but save us some time for a lot of good questions, which I see are already coming through. So I'm Jeff Hardy. I work in the Grantham Insitute at Imperial College. I kind of bring 3 digital hats to this, I think. So my first one is I work as part of an academic consortium called the Energy Revolution Research Centre. And this is part of a UK government £100 million Prospering from the Energy Revolution Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. That's a mouthful. What it actually is government funding smart local energy systems of the future in places in the UK. So trying to do net zero smart energy in different places. And we as an academic consortium have got the honour of working alongside those projects, learning from them, helping them out, all of that really exciting stuff. And at the heart, most of them are digitally enabled. So they're using digital energy platforms, they're using a lot of data, and they're trying to do some really exciting things with assets and with new actors in the system. I'm also on the board of a company that's a renewable energy developer, and they use a lot of data to try and identify great sites to host renewable generation assets like solar farms, wind farms, but also large batteries, solar carports, that kind of thing. So again, data being at the heart of that. And then finally, I sit on a challenge group to a distribution network operator, so an electricity distributor, the local distribution company in the UK. And that's obviously a company that's both using data to run its business and efficiently manage its networks, but also is increasingly going to be using data to enable new services to come to it through flexibility providers from all of those rich assets that are connected within its network. So it feels like we're on the cusp of something very exciting in the UK. Now, in my role in the Energy Revolution Research Consortium, we've just finished but not quite launched, a report on digital energy platforms. So this comes right hot off the heels of what Aidan's been talking about. And really that report is trying to examine the policy and regulatory environment of these quite new energy businesses and activities. And so I just wanted to bring you 3 insights from that work, just to kind of like add further discussion to what we've already talked about. So the first insight is that these digital energy platforms, which are really just places where you can connect those who have services with those who need services and widen the actors and the assets that are involved in the provision of those services. And it could be anything. There might be a peer-to-peer platform, a flexibility platform, active network management, local energy markets, all of these kind of things. But the thing about them is that they potentially unleash a whole range of new actors and devices into the energy system. So behind the meter assets in homes like batteries or electric vehicles, that kind of thing. Or all of this distributed energy resources like solar farms and wind farms connected at the local level, big batteries, all of those things. And so it can provide the visibility of the opportunity for these assets. It can connect those who have problems with those who have solutions. And it can provide all sorts of new services like using flexibility from these devices to defer network investments and that kind of thing. So the other thing it can do, which is one of the questions that we had come through, is that it can also start to work cross-vector. So there's a lot of thinking in the UK about net zero targets, meaning that we might see quite a lot more hydrogen in the energy system. Well, these platforms might be able to work across those different vectors. So for example, you might have homes that have both an electric heating system and a hydrogen-based heating system. And these platforms help automate or arbitrage between what is the right source of heating to be on at a given time, which is best for the system, can reward the customer, improve the service, all of that kind of thing. One of the things that we do point out in that is these platforms are really good at finding underutilized assets or new assets and connecting them with valuable outcomes like new services. But one of the things that's missing, which Laura has very eloquently talked about, is the fact that you can't always access the value of those things at the moment. So, we have quite a lot of siloed markets in the UK, which means that if you've got a really flexible asset like a battery, you might not be able to stack up all of those different values that it could offer to the system. So you need, in order for this to fly, you need both the assets to be visible, as Laura says, you need platforms that can connect problems with solutions, and you also need the value for those things to be available, to be rewardable. The second part of this is around trust, and the fact that trust is going to be absolutely essential as we move towards a more digitalized energy system and more digital energy platforms. Because on the one hand, as Laura points out, and as Aidan points out, in order for this digitalization to occur, you also need quite a lot of data to be flowing, and that data might be customer data, consumer data, personal data, which means that first, if people are going to be working with these new platforms and procuring or selling services through them, they're going to have a great deal of trust that their data is being protected. It may also be, because these platforms might create some quite complicated markets, there might actually be a requirement for quite a lot of automation of devices, so that rather than someone following the market signal and turning something on or off, it is just done automatically, which means that there has to be a lot of trust, because if that device is your electric vehicle and it's not ready with a full enough battery the next day when you need to go somewhere quite urgently, that's going to be a problem. And again, you need to be able to trust whoever is in the middle of this digital energy system to be doing the right thing by your preferences. And then the final issue, which Laura has already dealt with and Aidan has already dealt with, is the cybersecurity issue, which is if you've got more entry points into the system, do you have more issues potentially with cybersecurity, whereby there are more holes or loops or ways in which things can be interfered with? The final point I want to raise is what I'm going to call the Goldilocks dilemma. So a lot of these digitalization of energy issues and these digital energy platforms, they're new. And therefore, at the moment in energy, for example, they're not regulated. They fall outside of the regulatory framework. They're not licensed, they're not defined, and all of this kind of thing. So there is a dilemma here. So because what they might end up doing is quite innovative and could lead to great benefits, the regulator doesn't want to come in too early and start to define or prescribe what these business models should do, because it might lock out some of the models that have not yet come through or have not yet finished their innovation loop. However, if the regulator leaves it too late, what you might happen is that people get locked in and harm gets locked in, because business models kind of lock people in via technology or by platforms or by software lock-in or whatever it might be. And therefore the consumers can't switch out of it. They can't switch service provider, and therefore they're harmed because, as someone who's locked you in, they may choose to take an extra margin off you, all of those typical behaviors that you do when you're locked in. So the question in all of this is, how does the regulator create sufficient space for innovation to give confidence for these new platforms to emerge, but get it right when it does regulate so that it prevents harm but allows maximum benefit? So there's a real challenge in there about getting the porridge just the right temperature, if I continue the Goldilocks analogy. But I think that's enough from me. I am dying to hear what questions are coming through and see how we can get in and across those.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Jeff. So one question I can answer, which is, can contact details be given? I know the association is going to be making slides available afterwards, and I'm sure all three speakers will be happy to put their contact details on their slides. Maybe Aidan, if you put Jeff's details on yours, if you're willing to, given they're both colleagues in the same university, that would work. So Aidan, one important question that came in is consumer trust is essential for the take-up of innovation. And yet we're talking about new ways of doing new things, and big data and big tech are hardly trusted, and neither is the energy sector, I'm paraphrasing slightly. So how can we build the high trust that we need for a low carbon future?
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting question, and actually one I don't really have a full answer to. There's definitely a trust issue, especially when it comes to big utilities, big tech companies, and also governments as well nowadays. And it's people do seem to trust newer startups more. So it could be that startup companies with the ability to provide a specific service could show a higher level of trust, get sort of niche consumers on board than the bigger companies. It could also be that we need to just gradually roll out, maybe a bit slower than we possibly like, so we don't force people in order to adopt these technologies, but we need to show them what the benefits are. I think people will be more likely, like people engage with Facebook, people engage with Google, even though they basically use their data, because they get benefits out of those services and they can see those benefits. If we can show people what benefits they can get out of sharing their data, then we may well be able to start building trust that way as well. But I think it's not an easy question, and I think it's the sort of question which requires behavioural scientists, social scientists, PR people really to engage with properly in order to get further.
Okay, great, thanks. And Laura, I think you had something to say on this.
No, I totally agree. I think trust is exceptionally important, and as you say, there are lots of groups that are losing trust. However, it does is really reiterating what Aidan said, but maybe even extending it, is that if what we do is preempt the sort of business models through either over-regulation or over-caution, we will actually stop in many ways great services coming through. So what's important, and it's great to have the UK Ombudsman, I think, who's on this call as well, is to ensure that we design consumer protection into services at the inception of them, rather than at the end when everything has gone wrong. So if what we do is we launch these exciting tech-driven services, and there is a problem, maybe only with one of them, and maybe only in a very limited way, we will actually crush the whole sector from moving forward. So it is very important, but I don't think that we should stop it. I think we should help on the consumer side to design it effectively.
And I just make one tiny quick comment extra on top of that, which I'm in agreement on. I think the other thing is if businesses are going to be, let's say, automating things in homes, then the one thing that is going to be absolutely essential is that customer service and customer sorting out problems is going to have to be spectacularly good in that. And it needs to be instant and sorted out, which is almost completely the opposite of what you have in the energy system today. So and there are digital companies that are very good at this.
Can I just add, though, we are talking about the UK when we're talking about trust. I don't know whether we should be talking about the rest of the world. Maybe somebody could put their hand up and say they've got a really trusted energy sector from consumers, because we need to learn.
Right, there is a challenge. Another question which I think is linked to this trust issue, is there a process of consumer education progressing in parallel with the technology development, or perhaps should there be if there isn't?
Could I jump in here? On the consumer education, I think this isn't an energy specific issue. I think what this is an economy-wide issue, where we all have to understand a lot more about how data is used, in what applications, and who gets the value of it. I'm not sure it's an education in energy, because I'm not sure that many people are particularly interested in energy at all, never mind whether it's data driven or not. But I think that we do need a big global debate about consumers, data, trust, and maybe you even want to put in taxation there.
I hope everybody's heard the anecdote that when Michael Faraday was asked by a politician of the age if electricity that he had just discovered was likely to be of any use, the response was, "Well, sir, you will soon be able to tax it." So moving to another area, we've been asked to shed some light on the geopolitics challenges of power system digitalisation. So I don't know if that's anything that any of my colleagues have given thought to.
I'm gonna, can I start with one? I'm not sure if it's a minor issue, but it's an important issue. And this has come up in some work that I've done previously, and also in the digital energy platforms work that we did, which is it's another kind of security issue, but it's also a kind of like a value issue. So it's quite possible that a number of energy propositions could be those that are digital platforms which have a base in one country and then have customers in several other countries. So there's an issue of the data security and it being held offshore, so to speak. There's also the value transfer issue of the kind of like the value being accrued elsewhere from where it is being generated, so to speak. So there's all of that kind of thing, and that is something that government has stated large in several documents, but not what exactly is to be done about it. And clearly that's an issue that has pervaded in other digital energy, digital platforms, you know, lots of kind of international companies and so forth, but it's a key issue. I think probably it's worthwhile separating out the, let's call it the taxation issue from the security issue in that as well, because those are two important things, and one might be easier to regulate for than the other.
Okay, thanks. And Laura?
Yes, I think it is it is an issue that needs to be addressed and thought through. And Jeff's point about it being an international, global issue is absolutely crucial. However, when we went through this process, our report with the Critical National Infrastructure group, it was quite interesting because in some ways, the critical national infrastructure is pretty obvious where it is. The digital and data, in many ways, the visibility of assets isn't a problem. The interoperability of assets is going to require a significant amount more focus on cybersecurity. However, once you have addressed your cybersecurity issues, it shouldn't preclude triage data to be released and open. And we felt that that wasn't incompatible. It's, in many ways, cybersecurity has become a sort of omnipresent safety issue, but it shouldn't preclude the sharing of data. And I think that, you know, we've got to be careful and mindful, but it's not that cybersecurity issues aren't happening even without transparent and open data.
Right. Thanks. We've had a question again on consumer protection. How can we prevent less savvy, less well-informed consumers from being ripped off? And it's from somebody I know in the UK who believes they were ripped off by the incumbents when competition started. Consumer protection is an important area. Is it one where this will create additional challenges or reduce challenges or make it easier?
I mean, it's probably a bit of both in some ways, because you've got element of the ability to survey consumer markets and understand where misalignments are happening, mis-selling, etc. on one hand, and on the other hand, the complexities of how you are selling, packaging and marketing products, and as Jeff rightly says, giving the customer service that can create the redress is important. I mean, I do think the data and digital platforms, some of them are very good at customer service. Some of them are absolutely impenetrable and impossible to, in many ways, have a voice.
And if I can just build on that very, very slightly, in the most magnificent reports that Laura put out together with the Imperial College, one of the things that we did explore was the importance that if the regulator is going to allow more space for this sort of business model innovation, so you get a kind of a real myriad of propositions to consumers, then it needs to have two things. One, it needs to be as good or better at data and data science than the companies themselves, so it can spot bad behavior. And secondly, the regulator needs a commensurately large hammer compared to the freedoms it is offering those companies. And that is such an important thing. And it links back through to the important points that Laura and Aidan were making about skills in the sector. It's not just skills that will be required by businesses, it's skills that are required by policymakers and regulators as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious that we're getting more good questions than we'll be able to answer in the time available, even though I've got permission to go very slightly over and you've got permission to leave at that point. There's a question that I think Aidan was willing to take up. So could panelists, if you spot particular questions, could you use our chat to let me know that you'd like a go at particular questions that have come in? Aidan, you were commenting about the agent-based model. There's a question on the agent-based model as a useful approach and tool in utilising the data in the energy system.
Yeah, I mean, just a short thing on this. Agent-based modeling is an extremely useful tool in big data and has been used quite successfully, I believe, to do energy system modeling before and still will be. I think one of the interesting questions of digital technologies is that we need to ensure, however, that we do have quite a wide spread of techniques. There is a danger of focusing too closely on one technique and ignoring the potentials of another one, especially as we start localizing these techniques into specific energy applications and vectors. So yeah, agent-based modeling is excellent, but let's not forget everything else that we can use.
Right. Okay, there was a question, are there any good examples, either internationally or from other sectors, where regulators have still been able to allow innovation to flourish? With the subtext, it seems that energy regulators tend to regulate a lot and in a lot of detail, and so companies don't have much freedom. Do you have any advice for regulators there? Laura, I believe you wanted to do that.
Yes, no, I'm very interested in that, and it really picks up on the reports that Jeff, Aidan and I have been doing on regulation. And there aren't good examples that I can identify, but maybe somebody else in the energy sector. But I can identify other sectors that have enabled innovation to flourish, because as a regulator, they've been looking at risk rather than process. One of the problems that we've got, particularly my second chart with all that spaghetti about all these different components of the new energy system, actually, if the regulators continues to process regulate through that, through the malaise of all that noise, they will fall over. They've got to start looking to regulate for risk rather than process. And the food sector is very good in the many ways. Food safety absolutely regulates only for risk. It doesn't tell you what your food should look like, how it should be packaged, and what needs, what the components are. But it tells you to be A, transparent about the components, B, to ensure that there's enough consumer information and that it is safe. And I think we have only gone so far from being a nationalised, super regulated system to a more consumer-driven commercial sector.
Thanks. And I think rather than our last question, Jeff has volunteered to take effectively combining two questions. One is, how do you assign value to distributed generation at the same time cope with the extra complexity that it's going to bring to networks? And another question was that, which is very related, is if you own an electric vehicle, how do you access any markets to sell the battery capacity? So Jeff, would you like to answer perhaps our last questions?
Yes, so I think what I'll do is answer both of them, probably not sufficiently, but maybe give a little insight into some of the things that have been certainly pushed around in the UK at the moment. So I think firstly on the distributed generation. So yes, the more say participants you have in providing services to a network company, the more complex things become. But as it happens, things are going to get more complicated anyway, because we know from modelling in the UK that we expect to go from something like about 30 or 40% of our electricity generation being distributed generation to 50 or 60%. So the predominant amount of the generation. Combined with that, you've got Aidan's figure about connected devices, which tells you there's going to be about 76 billion connected devices by 2025. So that's about 10 per person on the planet, but probably more concentrated in certain places than others. So things are going to get more complicated anyway. Now, the question is, how does the digitalization piece help with that? And I think it helps with it by doing a couple of things. One, it allows networks to understand in much more granular detail power flows on their systems, which enables them to pinpoint much more accurately where problems are or where they're going to be. Now, they could still do conventional approaches to resolving those problems, but also if you've got all of these devices connected to the system that could offer some sort of services, then it seems a bit daft not to take advantage of those, particularly if it's going to be cheaper than the conventional option. And in the UK, this is all wrapped up in the discussion about moving to a TOTEX and an incentive-based regulatory framework around networks. We have the RIO system in the UK, which some of you will be familiar with, but really that's trying to move away from CapEx-based models to more TOTEX-based models, so things that don't have to involve in reinforcement. Now, of course, this comes back to Hugh's question about if he's an EV owner, how am I going to access the market to sell my battery capacity? Well, Hugh, if you're a complete geek, you might do it yourself, through some sort of model, if you're allowed to get into those markets in a sufficiently small clip size, let's say. But I suspect more likely you're going to go through some sort of intermediary. So that might be a digital energy platform, it might be an aggregator, it might be anything like that, or it might simply be the fact that you're not actually selling your battery capacity, but you're being told by prices when a good time to charge is. So it depends if you're going to do vehicle to grid, or if you're just going to be following the prices and working out when is a good time to charge your battery, because that should reflect the status of the networks and other things. So it should be penalizing you for charging at times that's going to add to peak capacity and force someone to reinforce. So I think it does enable all of those things, but there's a load of minutiae to be ironed out in all of this in the UK, but it's quite an exciting period because we are seeing some of these markets emerge.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I think I should probably offer the last word from the four of us after thanking Jeff, Laura, and particularly Aidan for doing the work on the report. But Aidan, do you have any final thoughts before we hand over to Dave Williams and the IAE?
Yeah, just a very quick final thought, I think. I think the thing which really comes to mind when writing the report and looking at conclusions are we definitely need upskilling. There's a question about regulation and will regulation be following innovation forever? And there is obviously an issue with this, but the issue gets a lot worse if the regulators don't understand the new technologies on the horizon and don't understand how they work, and the larger incumbent companies don't either. So we need to understand these technologies, and we'll need to be hiring and getting people on board who know how to use these technologies in an expert way, both from the regulators and the policymakers and industrial stakeholders. So I think that's my final word on the matter, and please download the report.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very, very much to the team here and for Richard for organizing really what was an outstanding discussion. I personally enjoyed this, learned quite a bit as well. For those listening, this webinar will be available on IAE's Rewind station. Please don't hesitate to visit this, share it with your friends and colleagues. If you're not already a member of the association, we encourage you to check us out by visiting www.iaee.org. Thank you for attending. Everyone have a wonderful weekend, and I officially close this webinar.